Coming up, what an excellent day for birthdays. Well, howdy folks, and welcome to Minute 24 of the Exorcist Minute, a show where we endeavor to examine, extrapolate, and excavate the Exorcist minute by terrifying minute. My name is Lester Clark.
And I'm Keenan Diaz.
And we'll be your holy guides on this journey through what some have called the scariest movie of all time. All right, so our minute begins with Regan explaining to Chris about her new friend, Captain Howdy.
And it ends with Chris asking what Regan wants to do for her birthday.
It's a birthday.
Yeah, so this first shot of our minute, which is after this insert where the planchette goes crazy on the Ouija board. It's interesting. So our viewers, I don't know if they've gone and cut The Exorcist into 132 individual minutes and they have to pull up different files. But if you're able to, on your DVD or your Amazon or your MOV, this shot that we have where Chris is saying like, oh, I guess you don't want to play. It feels like the previous one before we had the insert, but it actually is different. Before the insert of the Ouija board, we have a relatively loose framing of the two of them. They're relatively far apart from each other. It's pretty warm. Even though Chris is sitting and Regan is standing, they don't seem that much different in size, right?
Yeah.
And then after the insert of the Ouija board and this big change, even though we have Chris on the left and Regan on the right, now they're much closer. It's another angle of them. It's a darker background. And Regan feels like she is gigantic compared to Chris.
Yeah, she's standing. I can see it now. She's sort of like towering over. Yeah,
even though they have not moved. That's the power of cinema, baby.
Wow.
Right, the actors have not moved at all. But where the camera is, its height and what our background is, it changes the entire dynamic of the relationship.
Interesting.
Perhaps forever.
Oh my gosh.
You know, when I was a student as an actor, right, we'd be looking at like, why is this scene important? And, you know, we try to make every scene important. Or, you know, so why is it in the screenplay, right? So it would be like, after this conversation, nothing will ever be the same again. After this bus ride, nothing will ever be the same. After this hot dog, nothing will ever be the same again. But this really feels like the turning point in their relationship. Like we are now in The Exorcist to me.
Interesting. And this is actually, so to speak to that. So in the book, this is like the first thing that worries Chris. Like, I like how we have, you know, these noises and these weird happenings, but the first thing that like troubles her is this thing right here where something might be wrong with Regan, right? Their relationship is changing, is becoming different. And it was like you said in the previous minute, Keenan, with like, this is something that is so heavy on Chris's mind that she doesn't even notice the spooky thing happening. She doesn't even notice the planchette going crazy because, like, hang on, what's happening with my daughter? Like, what's happening between us, right?
Right. My daughter is being a little moody, a little teenagery.
Yeah. So she notes in the book that Howdy sounds really close to Howard, which is her ex-husband, Regan's father. And going back to that like psychological aspect of the Ouija board, Chris sort of wonders if maybe this is like some unconscious resentment, like manifesting in the form of an imaginary playmate. And she notices, right, like that Howdy doesn't answer. We see this like right here where Regan explains, it's like, well, I do the questions and Howdy makes the answers. And then the first question she asks, right, they both sit down and mom is sort of like humoring her daughter. It's like, oh, Captain Howdy, right? And it starts out as this kind of like innocent, it's like, Captain Howdy, do you think my mom is pretty? And you can see that Chris kind of like smiles. It's like, oh, what are you doing? I know what you're doing, right?
Oh,
and
you're going to give me a compliment in my life, right?
Yeah, right? And she, you know, she reaches out and she sort of like play, you know, punches, you know, her daughter's arm and then no answer. And in the book, this like Chris is thinking, it's like, okay, what is this? What is this new thing? Is this like some sort of like unconscious resentment towards me? Like Howdy sounds like Howard. Like what's going on here? And this, and to your point, Keenan, this is sort of the beginning of that rift between these two characters. And remember, folks, those 6 themes, right? You know, doubt, isolation, despair, conviction, communion, hope. This demon is pulling apart these two characters who find strength in each other, right? And when they're alone, when they're isolated, what can happen? Like what, where is their legs to stand on?
Right. It's part of what's brewing under all of this, I think, is Regan turning into a teenager from a child. When you read synopses of The Exorcist, it always frames her as a little girl. Right. It doesn't. It's this little girl, this innocent little girl who is possessed by a demon.
Right. That's the tag. That's like,
yeah.
Oh yeah.
You understand why we would say that. But Regan is both she is a child, mm-hmm. right? But she's what we might call a tween today, right? Mm-hmm. I think that today Regan would resent being called a child at her age. Right. At being a 12-year-old, she's pubescent. She is becoming a new thing. She's becoming a teenager, right? So I think the movie is more nuanced than that tag, right? That this is this child who's done this. She does childish things. She still does artwork. She likes horses, etc. Mm-hmm. But she's not a little girl. And that's, I think, hard for Chris to understand and for Chris to accept, right? That she will have thoughts about not only later on when the demon has full force and Regan has this sexual nature to her that's very disturbing, but thoughts about like, oh, maybe my mother isn't always right. Maybe my father has a point. That's something that children don't necessarily, little children really understand, but thinking teenagers do understand and start to question.
Right. The idea of Chris's little daughter, her little baby daughter, like mm-hmm. asking, it's like, are you going to marry Burke? Right. Which we're, going to see in, I think the very next minute, right? Mm-hmm. Questions about, it's like, well, don't you love daddy? Don't you, don't you still, love my father? Mm-hmm. And are you going to marry this other person who's been hanging around the house so much? Like that's not a question that the girl who made you, a paper mache bird, right, is going to ask. That's a different person right there.
And of course, they are all the same person, right? Because that's the contradictions of this period of time in a person's life, so a child's life. So when you look at, if you're able to pull up the Amazon video, pull up your MOV, your DVD, your collection of TikToks of a minute at a time that you recorded off of the screen in the theater, you'll see a back and forth between this power dynamic between mother and child in this blocking in this scene. So it's, we cut to the insert. When we cut back, Regan is now towering above Chris. Chris is smaller. She's frightened. They're much closer together in a sort of threatening way. Then when we cut to Regan, her background is no longer the background we saw in the corner of just the kids' corner, which you rightly point out is kids stuff, but it's also menacing fairy tales and wildlife and that sort of thing. Now we're including part of the wine cellar that's down there.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah, so it's like, oh, we're including different aspects of Regan's play spot. Yeah, she has a play spot there. It's also, we've tucked her away next to the wine cellar, and we just want her to be a kid and not question, these adult things, right? And then,
but I mean, like wine is a very like drinking alcohol. That's like a rite of passage kind of like.
Yeah, and she's right in the center of those two spaces you see, right, between her little corner of art and then the grown-up world. And then we'll cut back again. She sits down, and now they're going to be buddies. And we get back to the original submaster or two shot that is bright and airy when the mother is on the same level as the kid. And here in that shot, we can see the bird that she's built for Chris. Right, we're going back and forth between these different iterations of it. And again, it's not something that you would consciously necessarily notice in the visual blocking and the composition, but all of these changes in color and light and height and, who's taller than the other one is matched with the drama of the scene, right? What's actually happening in the dialogue.
It's interesting because reading the book again, it's still hard to like pinpoint exactly when this change happens. It's so, I guess the word is insidious, but it's like, it's sneaky. It's like, at 1 minute you blink, and I guess this is how parents feel, right? 1 minute, you're with your daughter or your son or your kid, and they're just like all smiles and lovey-dovey, and it's they're going to be young and innocent forever. And then you blink, and then suddenly it's like, where did this like moody, despondent teenager come from? Like, all I did was turn my head to look at something for like 5 seconds, and now like I've got this new person in my house.
Right. And then they go back for a brief shining moment. Yeah. I would point out that in the screenplay, we have this scene that's interrupted with some creepy creaking from a closet where the Ouija board came from. And we've cut that out. So there's enough scary or potentially scary things with the Ouija board or with, just Reagan, being independent from her mother that we don't need another like, oh God, there's something over our shoulder looking at things.
I like that. I like that we're putting the focus on the relationship changing being the scary thing rather than this like outside supernatural force.
Right.
Interesting. Okay.
We don't quite need it, I guess, or that's at least what Friedkin and the editor has decided.
I like that. Because ultimately it's going to come to the same thing, right? Like whether we decide like that there's a demon in Reagan or that like this is a story about a little girl becoming a young woman, it amounts to the same thing because like it is between them. It's the relationship between them.
Right. There's we were talking with Annie Nelson about, why we like certain horror movies at certain periods of time. Right. There's a lot of talk in the 1970s and 80s, or not during it, but afterwards, when we're sort of looking back at the kind of movies that we make, that they are about, divorce. We didn't typically tell movies about divorce in the 50s and 60s. That was still pretty taboo. And so when we have horror movies that are about divorce or the dissolution of the family, they can manifest themselves in movies like The Exorcist, which is at its heart about this little girl, being ripped away from her mother, but also things like, dysfunctional families, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, or The Hills Have Eyes. The reverse of those of what is this nuclear family that we've been told is supposed to be so great anyways? Well, they're the people under the stairs who eat human beings.
Right. Yes. This is fascinating. I love this. So we're not sure why Captain Howdy doesn't answer, but it seems like a calculated thing. It seems like not answering is all part of the plan. It's to drive these two characters farther and farther apart.
That's interesting to think from his point of view. So here we're imagining that Captain Howdy is real. We're just taking that as a given.
Right.
That he
is a character and he has motivations. Yeah.
Yeah, and he has moved the planchette to tell Reagan, don't have your mother ask questions.
Right.
And that he doesn't answer whether your mother. So he doesn't want to show himself in front of Chris. You're saying.
Yes. So it's not that he's like because Chris suggests it's like, oh, maybe he's asleep, right? Like it's not that he's distracted or he's off. It's like, now I'm going to go bother Father Marin now. It's like, oh no, I missed my opportunity. Like he's there. He's like sitting with his arms folded and he's like, nope, I'm not gonna do anything. I'm not gonna move that planchette. And this is actually going to work in my favor.
That Chris doesn't know that I'm there.
Chris doesn't know that I'm there, and also it's going to plant the seed in her mind that Reagan hates her secretly.
Yeah, Reagan's keeping secrets from her, right?
Yeah,
that Reagan goes to the trouble of saying, "Hey, I have an imaginary friend, and no, you are not allowed to know him."
Yes, yeah.
Like kids with their real friends, right? You make friends in middle school, and your parents are like, "Who are your friends?" You're like, "Nobody. I don't want to talk about them." Oh, and it breaks their heart.
Yeah, it's got to be the most. I mean, like I haven't experienced it yet, but like I can't imagine. Your kid comes home and it's like, oh, what did you do all day? And it's like, oh, nothing. It's like you did things and you just don't want to share them.
Right? Yeah, that's the kind of kid that I was in middle school.
I think I was too.
Yeah, I suppose a lot of people are. Yeah, and my father asked me about that relatively recently. I said, high school was great for me because the idea of high school being a terrible time for people, which I think is the stereotype, and I think is true for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But I said, high school was great. I was in, honors classes and got to learn wonderful things and take theater and be on the quiz team and all this cool stuff that I really liked a lot. And I learned how to edit videos. But middle school was the tough part for me. So I told my father that, oh no, middle school was awful. Middle school was where I had all that stuff. And he was like, and that's why you would come home and we couldn't get you to talk or whatever. I was like, I didn't know, inside yourself as a kid, how much you're hurting your parents' feelings by moving away from them. But
yeah, like so much of that stuff we're not aware of, right?
Yeah, I think it would have happened if not in middle school, it would have happened in high school. I think it might just be a natural part of what has to happen for a kid in the modern world to assert their independence. Because for I mean, certainly there are other cultures where this is still is the case, but in traditional societies, you would be with your parents and you'd be a child basically until you got married, and then you would go and have a room inside of the larger house with your parents, right? And then you were a grown up and you had a separate life,
right?
But it wasn't until then.
Yeah. And as like scary or horrible or, wonderful as something like school was, like whether, middle school or elementary school or high school or whatever, right? It like, no matter what it was like, it was something that was like yours. It was your experience, your personal experience. And so I can see kids not wanting to share that because like, this is so fundamentally mine.
Right. That's very interesting. Yeah. So Chris punches or kind of taps Reagan with her fist, like, "Oh, you're being a little scamp," right?
Yeah.
And we get sort of so we do end that scene with a little bit of a glimpse of the old relationship of they are, when they are in conflict, it's in jest and it's all fun and games.
Right. And then we cut up to so now we're up in Reagan's bedroom.
Yeah, it's a pretty hard cut, right?
Yeah.
It's not some nice dissolve or anything, and it cuts into the action of Reagan being tucked in while Reagan is simultaneously flipping open the cover of the Photoplay magazine. So it's a lot happening in this cut. To go from a stationary shot with nothing, no movement, essentially, just two actors smiling at each other and being happy in the moment, to this pretty frantic cut comparatively.
Yeah, which actually, I mean, like now that I think about it, like the book had a more I don't know what you would say, like a cleaner or more gradual, like there was a finality to this scene. Like they kind of like they go upstairs and Reagan sort of looks back down at the Ouija board and she calls Captain Howdy a poop. It's like,
yeah, old like, poop. That's Katharine Hepburn.
Like, yeah, right?
Oh yeah, old poop.
There's a definite ending to that scene. See, because Chris kind of like convinces Reagan to come away from the board. And it's like, oh, maybe he's sleeping, honey. Come on, let's go upstairs. And she follows her mother up, and then she just like turns around. It's like, I was like, why is he being so poopy? Like what, like, what's that all about? And then, light turns off and then it's like, them in Reagan's bedroom.
Right. Yeah. So we end on this sort of actor standoff, and we get to this shot, a rather unflattering shot of Chris on the cover of Photoplay magazine.
Yeah.
And there's a ton of information. I'm not sure how much we're supposed to know because, as I said, when we cut into it, Reagan is already flipping past this picture.
Right.
So I only notice it as I'm pausing it and looking at it, but there's a lot of information on this.
Yeah. And I wanted to speak to this. So, okay, so the magazine is called Photoplay. Is that a real magazine?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. 'Cause I was going to say, like, because I know there was a time, and maybe you can better explain this to me, but wasn't there a time when like we couldn't use like actual branded things in movies? Like it would have to be like a fake magazine. You know what I mean?
Oh, right. Well, it certainly would be easier. It was always easier to do that. There is the general law about that. The general rule is that a brand can object to you if you're using their real product in your movie or TV show or what have you, and you're using it counter to the way that it is intended. So if you're using it against its intended use, so you can pop aspirin, right? That's fine, but you can't use aspirin to poison your dog. That would be something they could object to. Okay. So you could have our buddy Cap'n Crunch. You could be eating Cap'n Crunch, but you can't have Cap'n Crunch and then the box Captain Howdy comes out of the box and kills people.
Oh, okay. So there we go.
Yeah, so there's like this Tarantino thing where he makes up fake brands, and in Kill Bill, there's a box of cereal that I think are called Blamos or something like that, or Blastos. And that's because they can't use a real brand there, even though Tarantino would probably want to come up with his own fake one anyways, because it's fun for him. But he can't use a real cereal brand for that box because there's a gun hidden in it. So the character pulls out the gun from the box of cereal. That's no good.
Is that like the cereal version of the Carmen coincidence, Blamos? And is this the Captain Crunch coincidence?
The Captain Crunch coincidence, yeah, exactly. So you can use, on the Alfred Hitchcock Hour back in the 1960s, they would often be sponsored by cars. Like that was their main sponsor. And so I can't remember if it was Alpha Truck Presents in the 50s or the Alpha Truck Hour later on, but one of them was sponsored by a car company. And so they kept getting notes all the time, like, be sure that you're not using cars to run people over. Like, even if it's not our car, like, we don't want to be part of this where you're like, the murder is that you've hit somebody with your car.
Right.
And I was once on a movie where there was a character who was drugging women and taking pictures of them, right, when they were sleeping. And the crew had to be sure that they covered every single instance of Canon, which was the camera that, maybe I shouldn't say that, but Canon, you were holding the camera up, and they hadn't gotten a letter from Canon. They hadn't gotten a letter from anybody, but they just want to be sure that they don't accidentally let slip. And then Canon is like, you can't do that. Canon isn't the camera of creeps who drug women. Yeah, that's not it. So I have a feeling though with this photoplay one that
can I speak really quickly too? Like, so that actually reminds me of like the invention of Reese's Pieces. Mm-hmm. So folks, Reese's Pieces came out. What was it like
early 80s, I guess.
Yeah, early 80s. And it was specifically because, what is it? Spielberg went to, what was it? M&M's?
M&M's, yeah. To have E.T. be lured out of the shed with M&M's like Hansel and Gretel.
So in the movie E.T., right, yeah, like Elliot was originally supposed to be using M&M's, and they were like, we don't want our candy associated with like some weird slimy creature,
some creepy alien, some creepy alien pedophile who touches kids in the chest with his long finger.
Oh my goodness! But yeah, so then they went to Reese's, and we're like, we're all about that.
All about that. I'll be right here.
Yeah. Oh my God.
Yeah, so M&M's doesn't get the product placement, and Reese's Pieces does, and it launches them as a brand. They were not really known before that. We talked about that. Like, Spielberg seems to like his world being filled with brands. Beyond the idea of like the brands are paying the company, right, product placement, or at least a lot of product placement isn't on camera. It's like, here's a bunch of jackets for the crew, and we'll make them for the crew, and that way the crew knows them. So it's not even on camera that the audience gets to see. But they might give you jackets, or they might rent you certain cars and give you a discount on that, so everybody knows that this is the car of the show. But even beyond that, Spielberg seems to just like having his world as real people in the 70s and 80s have it, like inundated with brand information.
Right. Yeah.
And in the classical days, right, the 30s, 40s, and 50s, the studios tended to avoid that. There's still some products that you can see that are around, but it tends to be generic coffee or generic soda from the fountain. We were in a much more generic world back then, not branded information everywhere.
Right.
So my guess here with Photoplay is that this is something they would contract with Photoplay to use their name here. So this probably isn't without Photoplay's permission, I would guess. That's what I would guess there. And Photoplay was one of the original fan magazines from the 1910s that Hollywood had this really strange relationship with these gossip magazines. They tended not to be like this one that we see of Chris here, like a tabloid where they're like shooting a picture of Chris and Reagan against their will that we get here.
Yeah, it looks very like not glamored up.
Yeah, in the old days, it was very glamorous, and most of the materials in Photoplay and other magazines were given to them by the studios and made to look as if they were capturing stars out in the public. But most of them were prearranged. They would because then you worked at a certain studio. You didn't, like today. You might do a Warner Brothers movie, and then a Sony movie, and then a Paramount movie, then a Disney movie. You're not under contract with them. You're not the employee of them for years.
Right.
Back in the studio days, you worked at Warner Brothers for 7 years, RKO for 7 years, and they were 7-year contracts. So they were your boss, and you like went to the office every day, very much like that. So they would set you up and set you up on a date somewhere, and they would have the photographer and the reporter know that you were going there and happen to bump into you and take pictures of you there. So most of the material was completely set up by the studios, although it was meant to look like, oh, we are going out and doing something like journalism. No one mistook it for hard hitting New York Times stuff, but something like, oh, we actually have our reporters, and they're always on the lookout, and they're always getting scoops of the celebrities out of the Brown Derby and the Coconut Grove. But it was mostly manufactured.
Interesting. So Reagan has this magazine, and she's reading it in bed. How interested do you think Reagan is in her mother's fame? Like, how does she Like, do we get any inklings of that?
Yeah, it's really strange, right? So she knows her mother is famous. She doesn't necessarily comment. I wonder if again, like, she's just too young to really understand what she's a part of. She's
Yeah.
looking at this really really unflattering magazine cover of even herself, right? So we don't get any dialogue or even a reaction shot here of her looking at it going ill or looking at it going cool.
Right. Like, oh, they got our bad sides on this one. And, like, she doesn't care. Like, it's almost like, it's like, oh, it's like me and my mom in a magazine. Like, I read other magazines. This is cool.
Yeah, who put this magazine here? But yeah, if you look at it, it says trouble in the McNeil house and that Howard has walked away.
Oh, I didn't even
You have to you really have to look. It says the night Howard walked out on his wife, big trouble in the McNeil marriage. Chris McNeil with daughter Reagan. So there's a lot of information there. Again, I don't think that we're really supposed to be able to read any of that copy on the first read through, or the first view through. And at the very top, it says Rock Hudson in head-on crash. And that confused me. I was like, oh, was Rock Hudson really in a crash in the 1970s? And I can't find it if he was. So they just happened to have taken a real movie star and said that he got in a terrible crash.
Oh, my God. And put it in a film like The Exorcist, no less.
Yeah, again,
a film that we're thinking is cursed. It's like...
Yeah, you're not supposed to be able to read this, I think, but it's just there. So again, they didn't like make up a fake name, They made a real name, Rock Hudson, big movie star, like the biggest movie star of the late 50s, the biggest male movie star at least. And then underneath it is Chris McNeil. So it's like, oh, Chris is in this world with real movie stars,
right?
But yeah, at the same time, I don't know. Do you want to attribute Rock Hudson's early death to the Exorcist curse?
No, I don't. I don't want to talk about this at all.
Do you know about Rock Hudson?
No, I don't. Here, tell us.
So just to be clear, this is not funny. This is all sad. We're not making a joke here at all. But Rock Hudson was gay in the 1950s, and that was pretty well known amongst his contemporaries. It's always tough when you look back at people in history who were LGBTQ plus, and we don't, in a time when they couldn't identify or wouldn't identify the same way that we would today.
Right.
So we don't know if Rock Hudson was gay or bisexual, how he would identify, but he did have, he was married to a woman. But most people who knew him at the time also knew that he had relationships with men, and there were always rumors about who that would be, who he would have a relationship with. But so he was a huge star of the 1950s, and he in the 1960s transitioned into sort of drama. And then by the time of this, in the 1970s, he was a big TV star, Macmillan and Son.
Okay.
So that would have been, so he was still a known commodity here. But then in the 1980s, he unfortunately catches HIV. Contracts HIV, and he has a reunion special with his movie star partner Doris Day. They were in a bunch of really light rom-coms together, and Rock Hudson came onto this reunion special, and he was visibly sick. And Doris Day was shocked. This was his friend. She didn't know he was sick, and he passed away. And he was the first, of the old stars to be outed in this way, and then to die of AIDS.
Wow.
Not funny. So I just want to be not trying to be funny at all. I think it's just strange that they would, again, use his name and create what I believe is a fake crash. Rock Hudson in heads-on crash.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's the kind of stuff that photoplay at this time, which is more tabloidy, would have done.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And yeah. So that part was not meant to be like we're not making light of it or anything like that. This is so your reasons for not laughing at that part are very different from your reasons for not laughing at the rest of it. Yeah.
Right. But yeah, it's such a trashy looking magazine. I don't know photoplay very well from this period. I know it from before. When it was glamorous, but I don't know if you've seen recently this is pretty recent, with 21 Savage and Drake, who created a fake Vogue cover for themselves.
Oh, no.
So Anna Wintour of Vogue has sued them for making in a music video, or not a music video, like the campaign for the music video, like a fake Vogue cover of them on the cover. And you're generally allowed to parody things, right? You're generally allowed to make your own cover of Time magazine as long, and put yourself on the cover as long as you, not like Donald Trump, like pretend it's a real cover.
Right.
So I don't know where this is going to land because they, Drake and 21 Savage have this fake Vogue cover. They have this fake performance of them on SNL, like as if they were in this media blitz. And I don't know if they explain it to you, it's very clearly parody, which is protected. But then if you just look at the materials themselves, they look real. It looks like a totally real Vogue cover.
Interesting.
Yeah. So Anna Wintour is not happy, as she is usually not.
Chris takes this magazine from her daughter, and she's like, why are you looking at that?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like in this, not in a mean way, but in a it's like, oh, don't rot your brain with that, honey.
Right.
It's not, it's like, who cares about that? Right. And again, I like this, it's such a throwaway reminder that Chris is a superstar, right? Because we get her on the cover of the magazine and everything like that. But it's like literally throwaway because Chris grabs it and she tosses it aside as if to say, this is not important. You know what's more important? My daughter has a stray eyelash and I got to get that for her.
Right.
And, again, we see like what really matters to her. And this is more proof of like this loving relationship that we were talking about earlier. But then also kind of like this is in the previous minute, we also had like that threat of like maybe that relationship is changing.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And just a little thing. I'm interested in what you think of this little line that Reagan has. She says, "I wouldn't talk." When Chris takes the magazine, she kind of like, tosses it over onto the chair, and she's like, "Oh, you wouldn't talk? Well, my makeup man wasn't there," and everything like that. And this seems like part of a conversation that like we're supposed to know the rest of like the context, but we don't. But it's like, naturally, like in real life, if you like walked in on these people, like you wouldn't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And they wouldn't explain it in the movie. Oh, you mean you wouldn't talk when we were having that photo shoot and, the photographer was trying to get you to talk and he was making jokes and you wouldn't talk, like we don't hear any of that. We just hear that last little like bit.
Right.
And so I wonder if like, did Linda Blair and Ellen Burstyn be like, oh, hey, let's make up a story behind this magazine cover,
Right. It's not in the screenplay that we have. Of course, there are changes as we've seen. The version that we have is an earlier, it's a production draft, but relatively early in the production in December of 72. So it's not there, and perhaps they have, worked on some ad lib conversation. Maybe there's another draft of it that we can't find online that is written. But yeah, it kind of works that it's sort of a fragment of a conversation rather than every single conversation is significant.
Yeah. And I like it, and it kind of like brings us into the world a little bit more. It's like, oh, this is real, right? Like, she's not talking about like the picture. She's talking about like the memory of the taking of the picture.
Right.
And I really like that. I also really like this little business of the like getting the eyelash out of Reagan's eye. I don't know why, and I don't know the words to like properly describe this, but it seems like so like real, like not acting at all. It's like, because she goes for the eyelash, she's like, oh, I didn't get it right. She goes back in there for it, and I don't know, like that seems like such a real like mom thing that a mom would do, kind of like fussing over the the child's like eyelashes or hair or something like that.
Right. I never know how to deal with this when I'm an actor in makeup. I'm always afraid of messing up my makeup and having the makeup ladies be mad at me, which of course they wouldn't be, but I'm always, don't touch my face. Don't do it.
But yeah, like, really nice little bit of business. And then Chris asks Reagan what she wants to do for her birthday. And isn't it nice that it's on a Sunday this year? And just this little mention of the holy day of Sunday, mm-hmm. right? I'm sure Catholics in the theater were like, ooh, Sunday,
Right. This is still the period where Catholics really took some of these things seriously, like not mm-hmm. eating meat on Fridays. Yeah, and McDonald's had to change their menu and add fish.
Oh yeah.
The filet of fish.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I think it's again just a really sort of nice moment there. I think we're going to increasingly have fewer and fewer of these nice moments of them being together. And we get to see Regan's bedroom, where we will spend a lot of time later on. So when we first see it, it's covered in cold. It's so freezing. It's something eerie. There's rats or something in the attic. And here's perhaps the only time where we just get to enjoy ourselves here.
It's a nice cozy bedroom, right?
Right.
Like, actually, until you just said it just now, I didn't even put together. I mean, like, of course, this is the same room, right?
Where the climax of the movie is, right?
Where this is the power of Christ compels you room,
right?
I didn't. Oh my God, Keenan, I wasn't even thinking of that.
Right.
This is that room, and we're not seeing it in those. I can't remember now, and I don't want to like fast forward it in the movie, but like from what I remember, it was much easier to see like the dimensions of the room once everything gets all demonic, right? Like the corners are sharp and stark, and everything is like washed in like one color. And here you have all of these colors, and like the background is blurry. You can't make out what's what's on the end table over there. It's very like, this looks like a close, cozy, like it doesn't even seem like the same size. Oh my God. Like now that I'm looking at it, like when Karis goes and first meets the demon in this same room, the room seems like so much bigger, like and like empty.
And it is quite a walk from the door to the bed, right? Every time that happens, it's like, oh God. And later on, Chris will try to like run from the hall into the room, and everything is very far away. You stop from doing it. Yeah.
Oh my God, I didn't even think about that. But yeah, like this is the same room. Huh. Oh, that is really cool. And that, that's pretty much all I got for this minute. We're going to get into some dialogue between Chris and Regan in the next minute. But for this one, that's all I can think of. So Keenan, are you thinking what I'm thinking?
I think I am, Lester.
All right, folks. Until next time, the power of Reese's Pieces compels you. E.T. phone home.
Wonderbar.
Elliot, your mother sucks cocks in it.
Oh no, E.T.
E.T., what are you doing?
What are you doing?
Do you know what Elliot did? Now I'm just combining both. Yeah. Or Reagan's neck does that weird stretchy thing. It's like,